Daniel Miller lived a quiet life in the wide-open lands of Montana. The fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the only sounds were the wind through the wheat and the soft calls of birds in the distance. He was 32, tall, hard-working, and kind-hearted, but he was also lonely. His parents had passed away years ago, and the farm he had built with his own hands felt empty. The long days were fine. He could handle work, but the long nights were different. That was when he missed someone beside him, someone to talk to, someone to share the silence with. One evening, while sitting at the local diner, Daniel overheard two men talking about something unusual, a mail-order bride agency that helped single men find wives from other countries. The idea seemed strange to him at first, but as the days passed, it stayed in his mind. Maybe this was his chance to find a partner, someone who could share his life even if love came later. He wrote to the agency, explaining that he was a simple farmer with honest intentions. A few weeks later, he received a letter back. The agency had found a possible match, a young woman from China named Li Mei. She had lost her parents and wanted to start a new life in America. The letter said she was 26, gentle, kind, and willing to learn new ways. Daniel felt nervous but hopeful. He didn't expect romance, only companionship and peace. He began preparing for her arrival. He cleaned his small wooden house, painted the porch, and fixed the broken chair by the fire. He even bought new curtains and a new blue dress for her, hoping she would like it. Every evening he looked at the train schedule, counting the days until she would come. Deep inside, he feared she might regret her choice once she saw his rough hands and quiet ways. Finally, the day came. The train station was small, just one long platform with a wooden bench and a single dusty sign that read Cedar Falls. The sky was bright that morning, but Daniel's heart was heavy with nerves. He wore his cleanest shirt and held a bunch of wildflowers he had picked from the meadow. They were not fancy, but they were bright and full of color, just like he hoped her new life would be. The sound of the train came from far away, a deep, rolling hum that grew louder until the iron engine appeared, puffing clouds of steam. Daniel's palms grew sweaty. People stepped down, men in suits, women in hats, families reuniting. And then he saw her. Li Mei stepped off the train with slow, careful steps. She carried a small brown suitcase and wore a pale pink dress. Her hair was tied neatly and her eyes were full of wonder and worry at the same time. She looked around, unsure of where to go. Daniel froze. He had imagined a shy, plain woman, but the woman standing before him was graceful and calm, with a quiet strength that drew everyone's eyes. He took a deep breath, walked forward, and said gently, "Li Mei." She looked up, her lips curling into a small, nervous smile. "Yes, you are Daniel?" Her English was soft but clear, touched with an accent that made her words sound musical. Daniel nodded quickly, his heart racing. "Yes, that's me. Welcome to Montana." He handed her the flowers and she accepted them with both hands, bowing her head slightly. "Thank you," she said. "They are very beautiful." People around the station watched curiously. A few whispered behind their hands. After all, it was rare to see a Chinese woman in that small town. But Daniel didn't care. He carried her suitcase and led her to his horse-drawn wagon. The air was awkward at first. They didn't talk much on the way home. The countryside rolled past, fields of gold, fences, and the distant mountains dusted with snow. Li Mei sat quietly, taking it all in. When they reached the farm, Daniel showed her around. The house was simple but clean, the barn filled with hay, the garden small but green. "This is your home now," he said softly. She nodded, her eyes warm with gratitude. The first few days were full of quiet learning. Daniel tried to teach her about the farm, how to gather eggs, feed the chickens, and milk the cow. She learned fast, her hands gentle and precise. She also taught Daniel small Chinese words, and sometimes he made her laugh by mispronouncing them completely. Slowly, the tension began to fade. At night, they ate dinner together at the wooden table. Li Mei would prepare rice or soup with herbs she brought from her home country, and Daniel would show her how to make bread or stew. They didn't share many words, but their eyes often met, and in those moments something unspoken passed between them. Still, there were difficult days. Li Mei missed her homeland deeply. Sometimes Daniel would find her sitting on the porch at night looking at the stars. When he asked if she was okay, she would smile faintly and say, "Yes, just remembering my home." He understood. He knew what it meant to miss something you couldn't go back to. As weeks passed, Daniel noticed small changes around the house. The curtains were now neatly tied with ribbons. Fresh flowers appeared in a vase every morning. The meals tasted better, warmer somehow. Li Mei's laughter filled the empty rooms. It was as if her presence had brought life to every corner of his home. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel came inside to find Li Mei humming a soft tune as she kneaded dough. The melody was unfamiliar, gentle and full of longing. He leaned against the doorway, listening quietly. When she noticed him, she stopped, blushing slightly. "What song is that?" he asked. "It's a song my mother sang," she said softly, "in my village." "It's beautiful," Daniel replied. "Even if I don't understand it," Li Mei smiled. "You don't need to understand. You just feel it." Those words stayed with him. That night, when the sky turned orange and pink, they sat together on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the hills. The silence was easy now, like a shared language they didn't need to speak. Daniel glanced at her and realized something had changed inside him. She was no longer just the woman he had agreed to marry. She had become the reason his days felt brighter. He remembered how uncertain he'd been when she first stepped off the train, how he had expected a plain, timid bride. But sitting beside her now, he saw something far more beautiful, a woman with courage, grace, and a heart strong enough to cross oceans for a new beginning. Before going to bed that night, Daniel found the courage to say, "Li Mei, I'm glad you came." She looked at him for a moment, then smiled softly, sincerely. "I'm glad too." From that day, their bond quietly deepened. The farm no longer felt lonely. Each sunrise brought a sense of peace, and every sunset painted warmth across their hearts. Neither of them said the word love, not yet, but both could feel it growing, gentle and steady, like the fields outside waiting for spring. As time passed, Daniel and Li Mei's life began to find a steady rhythm. What started as a quiet partnership slowly turned into a deep, wordless connection. The days on the farm were busy, but they worked together easily now, side by side like they had always belonged there. Li Mei woke early every morning to make breakfast. Fresh bread, tea, and sometimes small rice cakes that reminded her of home. Daniel always smiled when he saw them. "You bring your home here," he once said, and she answered, "Home is where kindness lives." The seasons changed. In spring, Li Mei planted tiny cherry blossom trees near the porch. "In my country," she told him, "cherry blossoms mean new beginnings." Daniel helped her dig the soil, even though he thought those delicate pink flowers would never grow in Montana's cold winds. But she believed, and that was enough for him. The townspeople who once whispered behind their backs began to see her differently. At first, people stared when Li Mei walked into town. Some were curious, others uncertain, but Li Mei met everyone with a gentle smile. She helped Mrs. Cooper, the baker's wife, when her child fell sick. She taught the school teacher how to make herbal tea for coughs. She even began to share little phrases in Mandarin with the children who liked visiting the farm. Slowly, the same people who had once doubted her now waved whenever they passed by. One old man said, "That woman has more kindness in her heart than anyone in this valley." Daniel couldn't have agreed more. He had never met someone so patient, so full of peace. When he made mistakes, she never scolded him. When the crops didn't grow right, she comforted him. When he was tired, she made him tea and told him stories about her village in China, about lantern festivals, music, and laughter that echoed in the streets. He would close his eyes and imagine the lights floating in the night sky. One evening after supper, they sat together near the fire. Snowflakes tapped gently on the window, and the room smelled of burning wood and tea leaves. Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Li Mei thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But if I went back, I would miss what I have here." "And what's that?" he asked softly. She looked at him with warm eyes. "You?" Daniel didn't know what to say. His chest tightened, not with sadness, but with something beautiful, something that made him realize how much she meant to him. Then came the winter that changed everything. It was colder than anyone could remember. The winds howled across the plains and snow buried the fences until they disappeared. One morning, Daniel woke with a heavy fever. His head pounded and his body felt weak. Li Mei panicked, but she stayed calm on the outside. She built up the fire, made hot soup, and wrapped him in every blanket she could find. Days passed and the storm grew worse. They couldn't leave the house. The roads were buried and the nearest town was miles away. Li Mei stayed by his side, feeding him spoonfuls of broth, pressing cool cloths to his forehead and whispering soft prayers in Chinese. "Daniel, you must stay strong," she said, her voice trembling though she tried to hide it. "Spring will come soon. You must see the flowers you planted." Sometimes Daniel opened his eyes just enough to see her sitting beside him, her hands clasped tightly as she prayed. Other times he only heard her humming that same soft tune, the song her mother used to sing. It carried warmth into the cold room. When the fever finally broke after several long days, Daniel woke to find her asleep beside the bed, her head resting on her folded arms. Her face was pale, her hair messy from exhaustion, but to him she had never looked more beautiful. He reached out weakly and touched her hand. She stirred, opening her eyes. When she saw him awake, tears filled her eyes instantly. "You're better," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Because you didn't give up on me." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "I couldn't." Daniel took a slow breath and said, his voice rough, "I thought I'd lose you before I ever told you how much I love you." For a moment, Li Mei froze. Then she pressed his hand between hers. Her voice was soft, but her words were clear. "Now you tell me," she said. "But I already know." It was the first time they had spoken about love, but they both felt it had been there all along, quiet, growing, and steady like roots beneath the soil. When spring finally arrived, the snow melted away, and the cherry blossom trees Li Mei had planted months ago began to bloom. Their petals opened in shades of soft pink and white, swaying gently in the breeze. Daniel stood beside her on the porch, his arm around her shoulders. "They really grew," he said with a smile of wonder. Li Mei nodded, her eyes shining. "I told you, new beginnings always find a way." From that day forward, life seemed brighter. Daniel grew stronger each day, and Li Mei continued to fill their home with love and care. She added colorful curtains, planted herbs, and painted small birds on the wooden walls of the kitchen. Everywhere her touch reached, life followed. The townsfolk often came by to visit now. Some came for her herbal medicines, others just for her company. Children loved her stories and often left laughing, carrying small paper cranes she folded for them. Daniel watched her from the doorway, feeling proud and thankful. Years passed peacefully. They had 2 children, a boy named Samuel and a girl named Rose. Samuel had Daniel's calm eyes, and Rose had Li Mei's bright smile. The sound of their laughter filled the air, mixing with the songs of the wind and the rustle of wheat. Every year, when the cherry blossoms bloomed, the family celebrated by sitting under the trees. They would eat simple food, tell stories, and watch the petals fall like pink snow across the grass. Daniel loved those moments most. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Daniel sat on the porch with Li Mei beside him. Their children chased each other in the yard, their laughter echoing through the evening air. Daniel looked at Li Mei, her face glowing in the golden light, and said softly, "Do you remember that day at the train station?" She smiled. "Yes, you looked so nervous. I thought maybe you didn't want me." He laughed. "I was scared. I expected someone different. I didn't know I was meeting the love of my life." Li Mei leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them." He nodded slowly, watching the petals fall around them. "You stepped off that train and stole my heart forever," he whispered. Li Mei smiled and said gently, "Then I'll keep it safe," and she did. Years later, people in town often spoke about Daniel and Li Mei Miller, the farmer and his Chinese bride, who turned a lonely farm into a home full of love, kindness, and laughter. Their story became one of quiet beauty and faith, proof that true love doesn't need grand gestures or fancy words. It only needs 2 hearts willing to understand each other, no matter how different their worlds may be. And every spring, when the cherry blossoms bloomed across their land, the wind carried a soft whisper through the petals, like a memory, like a promise that love once found never truly fades.